that.
Okay.
And we are. So Joe and I are having a blast here. We're live. So everybody, welcome. Pull up a seat here and join us for the Food Safety Chat Live. So happy that you're here. And if you're not going to hear this week, because in quality assurance, quality control, this is kind of a common thing, is if everything goes well, nobody notices. But Joe and I notice. So we want to make sure and tell you, you did a good job this week. And we really appreciate what you do out there for food safety, quality control, quality assurance. Thanks a lot. So if you're new to the show, my name is Bryan Armentrout with the Food Leadership Group. And every week I bring an esteemed guest onto the show and we talk about all things food safety, quality assurance. It's a wide-ranging topics. And with that, what you will notice if you're new to this is that this is not a presentation. This is a discussion, which makes it so much fun in that we get to interact with you and share information because that's what it's all about. In our field of work, what we do to communicate and help others succeed only benefits everybody because number one, right, we all eat. And so that's an important thing. And so with that, we're going to jump in here right now because I'm really excited to have Dr. Joe DeFeo with the Juran Institute on here. How you doing today, Joe?
I'm doing well, I'm glad you asked me to come back. The last time went so fast. I said I had so much I want to talk about, but I enjoyed it.
That's the interesting thing, isn't it? And that's pretty much 100% of every guest that I bring on. The first time they go through the chat and join us and have this conversation is holy moly. The time just absolutely flies. And it's true. It's because I think it's because we're talking about our passion and what we love to do and what we enjoy. And I think that's a big piece of it. So one of the things that our regulars are doing here, Joe, that you'll notice is everybody says hello to each other, which is fantastic. So Marin, nice to see you. We get some new faces here as well. So Wesley, good morning. Marianne, nice to see you. Wow, in Iran. This is always fantastic. I love how this platform is able to bring people from around the world and share this information as well. So I am in lovely Loveland, Colorado, where this is absolutely a fantastic time of year, Joe. The aspen trees in the mountains are starting to turn. You have these beautiful golden leaves and all these type of things and all this beautiful stuff. So where are you at in the world today, Joe?
I am in the heart of Connecticut, about as far as we can get from you without being California. And it's just becoming fall. And people refer to that as autumn. But when you look outside and you see all the leaves on the ground, you know why they call it fall. And yesterday was probably in its 80s, but night times are down to the high 40s. So it's fall. It's nice, comfortable. Air conditioning's off now. It's great.
Yeah, absolutely. You open up the windows at night, get that nice cool breeze coming in the house. Yeah, I love it.
Great.
May and September, my favorite 2 times of year.
Yeah.
Cheryl, good morning. Ryan, good to see you as well. Robbie, good to see you. In India, nice. Wesley, so yes, recordings. So we'll talk about this at the end as well. So we've created a database for all this information and you can watch it at your leisure. And this is also live streamed on YouTube, LinkedIn, and Twitter. So if you're watching live, you can watch it there too. So we want to share this information as much as we can. Hi, Clark. Good to see you as well. So with that, one of the things, Joe, that I'm always guilty about is I want to jump into the topic right away. But before we do, everybody join Joe and I for a drink of Joe. And what do you got there? You have Joe in your Joe?
I have. It's my
Cheers.
cup of Joe.
Wonderful. Very nice. So we have about 3.5 pages of notes of information to go over for today's show. So we need to dive in here because really, I think an important piece of this to kind of start is to give some background because, I mean, your career and your contribution and the organizations you're tied into in this space are amazing. So for the guests, Joe, why don't you give everybody a little bit of a background on Juran and what it is that you do?
Yeah, that would be fine. So I thought when I started working with the Juran Institute in 1988 that I'd have a long career. I would remember it. And it went like that. 35 years later, I'm the senior guy in the company. Everyone else ahead of me is gone. And I'm like, oh, my God, where did it all go? But then I realized, and I think I mentioned this to you, is that Dr. Juran started our company at 75. And he went on to 94. So I'm at mid-career right now. But the last 35 years of Juran Institute as an independent company, gave me a lot of opportunity, a lot of a chance to meet global companies, and whether it be food suppliers, producers, or aerospace and defense. No one particular industry. I happen to like food because I'm a foodie, and also I think it's something that will be around a lot longer than some other industries. So I kind of gravitated to some expertise in food because I'm good at eating.
That's really good too, I think, because having that expertise, and I think that gives you a huge leg up, because one of the things I rail against here on the chat is that we tend to compartmentalize ourselves. So the food guys don't talk to anybody else, but there's tons we can learn from other industries on how they manage risk and look at different programs and things like this. And even as you see in the food industry, we then subcompartmentalize ourselves in that, right? The dairy guys don't talk to the meat guys, don't talk to the produce guys. And there's so much information we can share on best practices that is lost. And I think that's a shame. So hopefully this platform helps to kind of bring that out as well.
Yeah, and if you were to so Juran Institute has been about quality management, operational excellence, and Dr. Juran provided a lot of ideas and thoughts and methods. But if we think about quality in food, it used to be about how it tastes, and that was important, and then how healthy it was, because the taste is there. It's got to be healthy, and then it's got to be healthier, meaning stuff can't be in there that shouldn't be in there.
Yeah.
Today, quality really is a contract between trusting the producer of the product and the user using it. And so it's very different because we don't trust a lot of things anymore, and for very good reasons. And this topic today might be one of those reasons, because there's a lot of counterfeit parts, fake food, fake ingredients, all as a necessity to meet the demand of feeding people at the same time of making it cost effective. It's not just malicious people out there saying, I'm going to send you bad ingredients. It's really about, how do you keep feeding a population? And so if you don't trust the food you're getting, you can see where that goes.
And that's how you're dealing with a pro, because that was a perfect segue into our topic for today, which is food fraud. And I think a lot of times within the food space, Joe, food fraud is overlooked, right? You see it in the standards and you're kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do a little bit of research and kind of look at it. But it's really not focused on. And sometimes you have some overlap. So how would you describe this issue as we face this? So
if we first of all, I'm not an expert at food fraud. I'm only an expert at eating. But there have been enough. I've stepped on it enough to be smart enough to know about it. I did a little research too, but I participate on a quality advisory board for the U.S. Pharmacopoeia Convention. And people may not know USP, but it was actually a semi-government organization founded by Abraham Lincoln. So it's been around a long time. And it basically, took the witch doctors took control of the witch doctors back in its day to make sure they weren't given, crazy potions. And they created this convention which says any product that is sold that is going to be used for medicinal purposes has to be monitored. And so USP monitors that. And over time, they become a full service organization. And, the whole goal here is to protect our food or our drugs or our, aerospace and defense from fake ingredients. And what shocked me was in the last year, they said that 60% increase in fake ingredient evidence from the year before in many areas. And from the simplicity of saying my product is 100% pure, which may not be truth, to you as a supplier, producer, not knowing some of the ingredients coming in or just not doing what you're supposed to do. So given that little background and preparing for today, I was shocked to see how often it occurs. And unfortunately, it doesn't occur because the large producers of food know it's happening. Right. It's usually the result of an investigation, the result of finding out.
That's a good point, because part of the problem, and this is kind of what frustrates me when you're looking at food fraud in incoming materials, is the fraudsters know what you know. So if you're looking if you're looking at a monograph or something from USP or things like that, they know what's being tracked. And so they're finding ways to circumvent that system and figure out new ways to sneak in bad stuff under the radar. The prime example I think about is back when we had the melamine issue with dog food and these type of things, where that these fraudsters found that this chemical mimicked protein content in analytical tests. So they're like, yes, cheap, crappy chemical left over from manufacturing of chemical products. We'll throw this in food, and voila, we'll make a fortune. Right. Well, it started killing pets and all kinds of other nasty things, and we didn't find out it, to your point, until after the fact.
Yeah, it's called filler. It's and people have to understand. Well, let's define fraud a little bit. So there's misrepresentation, meaning 100% pure, 100% organic, 100% natural food. That's a marketing thing that good companies do, and it's still a form of fraud if it's not true. Okay.
Right.
And they're out there. Substitutions. This ingredient will work for this ingredient as good. Tell that to a drug manufacturer. Only certain industries can mix it in with their sauce, and it doesn't really affect anything. It gets bulkier sauce, but it's a fake substitute. Adulteration of the product, changing it against you were supposed to, mainly for economic gain. And this is the real key that a consumer, if you're a consumer out there, if something's so cheap, it's probably a fraud. And this is the only guide you have. Your local supermarket will put on sale items. If that sale item is still more than the one next to it, there's something wrong with it. And unfortunately, not everybody can afford the right stuff. But most fraudulent products, which are made by producers, are cheap because they use cheap stuff and unhealthy stuff. And you want to try to stay away from that. But for the majority of us who buy product, we're hoping that we trust the producers of those products. So the only other thing you have against food fraud is, if you're on the consumer side, is buy from representative, organizations that are known to have really good safety. Now, that falls apart when you go to a restaurant. And I use this example a lot because if you go to a restaurant and you have a great restaurant known in your area, you trust that the ingredients that they bring in, their hygiene that they have, and the way they mix their food is going to be the right stuff and health. Yeah. But we don't know that about fast food chains. We don't know, and you've got to think of these huge supply chains. Where's all this food coming in? If the big McDonald's and Burger King, those folks use 50% of the world's potatoes, you can imagine where's all that potato coming from. Now I know where it's coming from, but if there's a shortage or a bad weather, they're going to get it from places less desirable. So now all of a sudden you don't know where that supply chain is. So we have to trust our supply chain. And unfortunately, in some supply chains, you can't do that. Food is one of them that kind of limits the exposure because product has to travel and stay fresh for the most part. So if you're dealing with fresh produce and vegetables, but when you're dealing with concentrates and you're dealing with dry components, it could be made anywhere and shipped. And so you got to be really cautious of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And on your misrepresentation piece of it, I think this is a huge one. This is something that I struggle with a lot of times in manufacturing environments is label claims. So when a product says gluten-free or soy-free or things like this, in the consumer's mind, free means zero. There's nothing there. And that's not necessarily the case because tests have limits of detection and these type of things. And when you try and communicate that information to a consumer, boy, that's not a pleasant conversation because, to your point, Joe, their trust has been broken. So if you have a family member who has celiac disease and you're saying gluten-free, but actually there's around 5 ppms there because it's below the limit of detection and you're not sure, that can really damage your brand.
And a lot of those misrepresentations are market misrepresentations to get on a bandwagon that's popular. Yeah. So zero alcohol beer. We assume it's zero alcohol. And the other part of it too is if it's gluten-free, it doesn't tell you that it's not sugar-free, or they added a lot of sugar to make up for the gluten. So just because something's free, it may contain something else. And it's legally misrepresenting, meaning they're saying the right thing, just that it's not. Zero could be up to what 0.23%, 0.023%. So got to look at the amount.
Well, and I know as a consumer, I mean, there's certain things that I look out for. Olive oil, right? Olive oil is notorious for food fraud, right? Substitution and using cheaper grades and saying that, oh, this olive oil is single source from this family in Tuscany, and yeah, is it? Probably not.
And they ship it over here for $1 a gallon.
Exactly. So my strategy around that is I buy my olive oil at Costco, right? Costco, really good quality systems. I'll buy Kirkland. They pay really close attention to their brand. And I'll buy organic extra virgin, right? So I'm trying to put these layers of protection in place to lower my odds to make sure that olive oil is what it really says it is.
You see these commercials of the coffee growers and the head person in the organization going out to the coffee beans and checking them out, or going to the tea leaves and checking them out. I was with a large Italian pasta manufacturer in Italy, and I asked them, why should I eat your mass-produced pasta? And he says, I have children, and I would never serve my children something that I didn't think was right or healthy. And I trace every ingredient that we have. That's the kind of thinking that prevents food fraud, because you're creating an organization. We have different people on the line here, producers and users. So in other words, people who eat and then people who manufacture. So on the manufacturing side, avoiding counterfeit ingredients, avoiding misrepresentation is a choice the organization makes in terms of its supplier quality system. Meaning, are we going to tolerate it or not tolerate it? Are we going to have high risk or low risk? And so it's a choice organizations make, and the better organizations make those better choices. Not that a small company does it on purpose, but they may not have the sophistication to produce the level of safety you have. But then I have to put something in place to prevent that from coming in. So one is, it's a choice. We don't have choices when we go to restaurants, except the choice of the restaurant we make.
Exactly. But I think that's a really good point, because one of the things I would always teach my quality managers is the time to put in your quality standards and your rules of the road are before you need them. So when that crisis comes, you're going to make the right decision. You're not going to be tempted to cut corners. So back to your potato example, if there is a shortage of potatoes and you're tempted to go out there, and because you got to keep the production running, to find a secondary source, and you're like, I'll find whatever, right? That you need to have those guardrails in place, especially now too with the environment we're in. If you're producing a product and your ingredient prices are going up, and your CEOs come into the procurement team and say, hey, listen, we got to keep our price in line with where we've been. We can't increase our pricing. So you need to figure out a way to do that, right? That puts incredible pressure.
Yeah.
Great question.
The other thing is, you got a question?
Yeah, got a couple questions here, Joe. Pop this up here on the screen here. Austin asks us, what does the process look like for procurement to ensure authenticity? Oh, that's a big topic.
Yeah. One is, so let me start here. The food supply chain is getting technologies that allow traceability right to the soil product came from. Yeah. And blockchain technologies is enabling. And it's kind of like if I am making an aerospace part for the government, and I have a certified foundry that makes the part, and the ingredients that make that part came from a certified steel manufacturer on up, there's traceability there, right? And that traceability can be printed right on the part. And it's probably one of the tightest, most transparent supply chains, and they still get fake parts. We never had that in like food industry, except for, you purchase by making a contract with a supplier, and they give you some accepted quality level that is acceptable to you. You've agreed to that. And if you don't audit, if you don't test, it could deteriorate. And a couple of things happen in organizations. One, if you don't test, it will deteriorate. If you don't audit, they'll give you the lace, because they'll always give the best to the people who want the best. But there are tools today that allow you to track those resources. In blockchain technology, I'm not an expert at it, but I've observed it. And I laughed. Somebody said, they said, we can tell you where that food is coming from on that shelf in that supermarket at any given time based on these codes. And I laughed. I said, who needs that? Now here I am sitting here saying, yeah, we all need that, right?
Yeah.
So one is the traceability of the supply chain. But here's something interesting. The answer to this question is really, when does this stuff occur? In other words, it tends to occur during disruption. It tends to occur during economic conditions. So the war in Ukraine right now disrupts the grain supply. Now, all those people who relied on grain from the Ukraine have to get grain from somewhere. Well, who else makes grain? And why was Ukraine's grain so good? So it's a disruption and you backfill. So one is any disruption, you have to put your audit out there and make sure you're not getting fake stuff. The second one is, and it's misrepresentation could be taking things out of the ingredients that you thought were in. And so in the food industry, more testing of incoming raw material for the most important critical to food elements, critical to quality elements. So in the past, we took the word for it from the supplier that everything was there. Now we have to test for that. So I don't think I have a specific guideline, but one is there are tools to monitor transparency of the supply chain, farm to table local restaurants, and now expand that further, farm to table mass produced restaurants, mass produced food will be the next level there. The second one is you have to alter your quality management system. If you are in an environment that is going to be hit by disruption because of an economic condition or a shortage, like integrated circuit shortages over the last few years, or hard capacitors and resistors, those kind of little things. But you can be aware of it and boost up your quality management system at those times. Now, on the ingredient side, false labeling. Labeling is an art, a science, and a law. And most big manufacturers will take art and law, leave the science to the science guys. In other words, we're going to manipulate that label to sell. So we're not doing anything illegal. We're just going to make it clear that if you have poor eyesight like I do, and I can't read a label and I don't walk around with these, well, I'm going to make that print damn small so you buy that product, right? But I'm going to make it real big so you don't have to wear the glasses that says gluten-free. So we think about the product, but it's the label that gets you in trouble, because the label is a contract between you and the law, you and this consumer. And if I find that label was wrong, I can't blame your supplier. I got to blame you. Yeah. So the emphasis really is on whatever you put on that label better be in the jar. And the only way you're going to know what's in that jar is if you test properly for that.
Yeah, and the consumer is getting more sophisticated as well. So, for example, there are home test kits now you can use for gluten. And I've gotten a
lot of different additives.
Yeah. And how good are those tests? I don't know.
Let's put it this way: they're always going to get better tests if we believe the problem is going to get worse. So they're going to get better. I was thinking of, there's also certain evidence that something may not be up to par. For instance, if you ever go to San Francisco Wharf, you could buy a zipped up sweatshirt for $10. You go to Amsterdam, buy it for $10, and then you go down the road and buy one for $60. What's the main difference between that $60 and that $10? It's the zipper. The zipper is the weakest link. It will break. It's not made well, right? And so I think I sent you an example that I bought a ski jacket. It was a Spider ski jacket, very expensive. Bought it from the ski slope, and the zipper broke a few months later. And I sent it back to the manufacturer, and they said, "This is fake. It's not ours." Oh. And I said, so I went back to the mountain who sold it to. I said, "You sold me a fake one?" He said, "No, that was a sale that day. We had other people in there." But the week, it looked exactly the same logo, but the zipper was cheap. So there are some ingredients that are just cheap that you could tell coming in. It's the wrong color, the wrong shade, something. But supplier quality in every industry, catching it at the source is where the emphasis has to be. And then proving that your labels mean what they say they do.
Yep, definitely. So you had some really good tips here on what you need to be aware of as a shopper, right? We were kind of talking about price, right? If it's too good to be true, yeah, guess what? It probably is, right? The guy with the coat coming up to you on the street saying, yeah, you want to buy a watch? You want a Rolex? Yeah, we all know how that is. Brands.
I argued with a fake Gucci belt guy on the street. He wanted $50. I said, but it's fake. How can it be $50? He said, well, the leather's leather and the metal had to be made. I said, no, but he had getting $50 for a $300 Gucci belt or a $600 Gucci belt. And I argued with him.
Oh my goodness. So that's a good example, right? And this is where fraudsters use brands against you, right? Because they're trying to steal the reputation of that brand and piggyback on that. Raw ingredients versus processed. That's a good one, right? So which is riskier, ground black pepper or whole black peppercorns, right? It's the ground pepper. Because to your point, Joe, what does that supply chain look like? And if you're looking at pepper, right, it goes through all kinds of different hands. Anywhere along that supply chain, somebody could go, I'm going to add in some extra stuff here, and nobody will be the wiser.
There's if you think about that too, even good ingredients that you let go bad is fraudulent. So, for instance, there was a court case, I think 2021, a company called Valley Processing was FDA came down for concealing poor quality juice, and they stored it wrong, improper storage. And then they mixed it with good stuff. Now, it wasn't bad. It just was beyond its date, Yeah. And they got hit pretty hard. So they were storing it in dirty conditions. So even bringing in good stuff, storing it poorly, and then mixing it. And there, there's if you look at production of chicken and pork, those food chains are, multiple different places coming in, and there's a lot of abuse in some of that industry. So the FDA also knows where to look, and so they're looking for you. You're a good producer. You're looking for the bad guys out there, and together it keeps it pretty low. I don't know the food number, but in aerospace and defense, 2% of all parts, which is like 25 million parts a year, are found fraudulent. Wow. It only takes one of those parts to take a ship down or a plane down or rocket.
Yeah. Or a fighter jet to go flying off and nobody can find it. Yeah.
And think about food. Generally, the food we eat is safe unless there's a botulism issue or something poor. But if you don't protect yourself by doing this legitimate audit, this legitimate proactivity on it, you could end up in a situation like these guys.
Yeah. Here's an example.
School lunch programs. So that was the kicker there.
Here's an example from my past that I always need that just got burned in my brain. Is because part of this too, right, is some countries have better reputation than other countries, and Japan, right, really up there with a reputation for high quality. There was, and I use the word was, in Japan, a food company called Snowbrand. Gigantic company, $7 billion a year food company, extremely well known in Japan. And they were in the fluid milk space and things like this, Joe. And what they were doing is they would bring back expired milk from the grocery stores, bring it back to the plant, open the containers into a vat, and then rework that into new milk. So fraud. And what they didn't think about was this expired milk was sitting in this tank and they weren't cleaning it correctly. Staph started growing, toxin was produced, and caused a massive outbreak in Japan of intoxication with staph poisoning. The CEO of the company went on stage, and like they do in Japan, right? They'll drink the product to show that it's okay. He promptly went backstage and threw up. But Snowbrand went out of business because of that, gone. Within a few years, they were gone because, to your point, the consumers lost all trust in the brand.
Yeah. By the way, that gentleman, I think it was Mr. Austin, the last question that we were going to get to, will probably give him more answers to how can you prevent some of this from happening. So stay tuned.
Mm-hmm. Yep, definitely. So let's see. So dilution, we were talking about that as well. Natural. So what about like natural food markets? What do you kind of think about those guys?
I think of them the same way I think about natural food juice. How natural is it? We're ignorant with what that word means. Organic, natural, safe, tasty.
Healthy.
It's got a lot of variables. So I believe in the food chains that are natural. I believe in the Whole Foods. I believe in the Trader Joe's. I believe in the markets that are known to be organic. But if they're, one of the fears I always have is the more they have, the more locations, the more, the harder to manage all that, particularly on the produce side.
Yeah.
Leafy vegetables is probably the biggest concern that you would have, because it's the area where you could probably get the most contamination, through that supply chain. But you haven't seen too many failures. You haven't seen too many issues. And I have to believe that they've got a pretty good program to maintain safety of that food coming and going. The one thing that I do notice in the natural chains is that natural stuff goes bad faster.
Yeah.
And so if I bought organic strawberries and normal strawberries and put them out in days, I'm done with the organic strawberries. The other ones, I'm like, what are they? It's like a Twinkie that's been going on for 20 years. It's still good. So there's something about, not natural with that. And so I'm very confident on the legitimate, natural, whole food like chains.
Yeah.
But yet there are also other brand supermarkets that create these little natural produce areas. Those worry me. They worry me because those supermarkets run on high volume, lower price. And so if a supermarket's only looking at a 1% to 2% margin, it doesn't leave them much room to take a shortcut.
Right.
Take a shortcut. And unfortunately, a producer of food has got a better quality system than a supplier of food. So the supermarket is not going to have a huge quality management team out there, testing product as it comes in. So there's a big that it shows up. Here's an example. I saw this Castle Cheese was sentenced to 3 years probation and fined and all this for adding cellulose to their Parmesan cheese. But that wasn't the problem. You can have cellulose in the cheese, but they advertise it as 100% Parmesan cheese.
Right. And
so let's say that you were in this, natural store and it said 100% Parmesan. Well, first of all, I want to know if it came from Italy, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if it's 100%, it's got to come from Italy, because that's the only place real Parmesan cheese comes from. You don't buy 100% champagne from Connecticut. You get sparkling wine, can't get champagne. Yeah. So the producer of that should question. Okay, the seller of that. So, but there are so many, 10,000 products in a supermarket.
Yeah.
Right?
Parmesan. Yeah, that's a good example. So that's one of those ones that is notorious for fraud, because did it come from Parma, Italy? Probably not. And part of it too, to your point, Joe, is this goes back to buy things in their whole state. It's very hard to counterfeit a wheel of Parmesan cheese. It's really easy to counterfeit shredded Parmesan cheese where it's ground up, because then you can add that other stuff in. Little interesting.
It's interesting. The Whole Foods cost more, even though they're processed less, because of that. We know they're safe, and we're willing to pay more for that.
Pay more for that trust,
and taste better.
Well, here's an interesting little. It's just a little tidbit of weird information, which I'm famous for collecting weird information. So I won't name the company, but in New Jersey, there's one brokerage that brings in almost all of the Parmesan cheese in the U.S. because there's a licensing system behind that. And it's a fascinating of how all these different type of things work. So if you're a fraudster, right, you're completely bypassing that system and bringing it in another way. So they're circumventing that system.
Yeah, you're bringing in ingredients and you're making it down the street.
Exactly.
Yeah.
As an example of just trying to manage all these massive type of items in the retail side, it's the same challenge for large food companies as well. So I worked for a large dairy company that had 3 different divisions, and we did a survey of all the ingredients that were purchased in the company, Joe. And this company grew quickly through acquisition. So they would buy a small mom and pop fluid dairy company in Indiana or whatever and integrate it in. But essentially they said, okay, keep on doing what you're doing and just start sending the money to us. We started doing a survey of all the things that we bought in the company. 6,000 different things. How in the world could you even create an army of people to manage to look at all of these type of risks across that company? So we started a process of whittling that down because there was crazy duplication. So you need to get that right level of supplier management so you can control the system. Otherwise, the gates are open from the perspective of fraud.
Yeah. And the supply chain, we're talking about fraud, on the quality side is worse. For instance, the term economically motivated adulteration of product, EMA. That is a choice we make to balance the cost effectiveness of producing a product. And I remember a large sauce manufacturer years ago had a lot of, and this is where the quality meets safety. The customers were complaining about the taste, which is the quality side. It was safe, but they're complaining about the taste. And they were particularly saying how over time, there's less tomato and more sauce. And in the investigation, it was absolutely true. They were not using as much tomato because the most expensive ingredient in tomato sauce is the tomato. Yeah. So if we need to reduce the cost of the jar of tomatoes, we're going to add other things: salt, water stuff, right? So what happens is when a food producer goes too far in adulterating the product to make it cheaper, the customer stops buying.
Yeah.
So on the quality side, we tend to catch it. On the safety side, we don't, because no one knows. So there's that balance between put the emphasis on detecting fraud and minimize adulteration of product to a point where your customers dissatisfied the quality of it.
Right. Yeah. And that's a good point on the quality control side of things. These changes, drastic step changes don't occur. That they make little changes over time. Right. So, okay, to your point, we'll start adding a little more water to the base. We'll start buying a cheaper source of tomatoes. And eventually it gets to the point where the consumer tastes that product and they're like, oh, this is terrible. What the hell happened to this? And so they quit buying. On the adulteration side, your juice story earlier reminded me I don't remember the company, but there was a juice company and there was an investigation into this. There was actual video on this, Joe, where they were adding, and they're saying, all right, we're only adding sucrose type things, natural ingredients into our juice and things like this. But it turned out they had a secret room behind the main receiving area where they were bringing in like high fructose corn syrup and sneaking it in, and FDA found out about it.
Yeah, so that's fraud.
Oh yeah.
That's just fraud.
Isn't that crazy?
You mentioned you mentioned olive oil, Parmesan cheese. The one thing we're seeing, and particularly if we're in America here, but I realize we got people all over the world, and I think this pertains to them. We're getting food product from a lot of sources now that we never had before. And we take for granted they're all safe. But a lot of the places it's produced don't have the same laws, the same economic motivations that we do here. So it's much easier to, as a consumer, to buy something that is not up to par. I think for the most part, we don't die from it, but we get taken for our money because it's not living up to the health standards and nutrients, that we want. And, food supplements is a good example too,
Yeah. There have been recently cases of, another big area of fraud is wine, right? Labeling one wine. Oh, geez. Yeah.
I'm working in the wine industry, and I just got married in Napa Valley, California, wine country. And you're right on the head, because wine is a precision manufacturing process for the greatest vineyards. And then there's the mass producers. Yeah. And although the mass producers may have started out as, small vineyards, their customer base has grown so large, they have to maintain it. And what I've learned is that the customers want sweeter wines and lighter wines. Well, because most people's wine is bought in supermarkets now. Well, what does that say about if I'm the producer of wine? What do I have to do? Well, I could buy less good grapes, mix varieties of grape, and get it to taste good enough, but it's not a Napa Valley wine or a Sonoma wine or a French wine. It's just red wine. And so they're meeting the customer requirement, but some go too far. The good wine companies will never add anything but grape and the proper chemicals to make it work, but mostly it's just the grape and the juice. Others will, they're starting to put additives in, things that make it bulkier, faster. But the worst part, they don't let it sit long enough to be ready to be a good wine. But that whole industry is being, the quality side is getting beat up because the consumer's needs are changing.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and a lot of people don't realize too, behind the scenes, the wine industry is on that lower tier products, highly commoditized, right? They're trading and selling and moving crops around, and you may buy from one vineyard this year and then switch around and get your supplies from different areas, all trying to meet those price points 100%.
And it's interesting too. You're seeing so many local vineyards pop up, and you have to ask yourself why. Well, when you taste a fresh wine, you notice the difference.
Yeah.
People say, "I'll go to Italy. You got $2 bottle of wine. It tastes better than a $50 bottle of wine." It's the big difference. It's just fresh wine. Where we tend to have wine on shelves for a long time that's not supposed to be on shelves for a long time. So you see these local vineyards pop up. That's where the good stuff is.
Oh, that's a good point too. Is like, so what the wine industry has adjusted to as well is people don't store wine like they used to, right? So they would produce wines to age, and most wines are consumed pretty quickly. And so they've figured that out. And they're like, okay, I'm going to create that wine for that usage within the first 2 years. And then, right.
Yeah, it doesn't have to last 10 or 20. The good company is still out there. And then sadly, it's, wine industry is an art.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely.
Making wine's an art.
Here's kind of an interesting one that people may not realize is the regulatory side. And it's not fraud, but it's, I think it gets into kind of that trust piece that we're talking about, Joe, is within the CFR, there are the Code of Federal Regulations. There are standards of identity for different types of food. And this really goes back to fraud. So the industry said, okay, fine, we're going to create these standards. And this is what whole moisture, part skim mozzarella. This is the standard of identity for that. This is the standard of identity for cream cheese. So what companies have done, so everybody, if you're not aware of this, next time you're in the grocery store, pick up a container like of whipped cream cheese or things like this that are nice and soft and spreadable versus a bar of cream cheese. You'll notice on that tub of cream cheese, it says cream cheese spread. It's not cream cheese. It's cream cheese spread. It's outside the standard of identity. So they've created this new category there where they can add water, make the product, and granted, right, it makes it easier for the consumer to use. It's a benefit. But if you think you're buying actual legal cream cheese, you're not.
Yeah. And it happens to be the last word that you have to read.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. But, the thing is, this is a good example in our field so in quality, you have a relationship between a consumer and a supplier, or a customer and a supplier. And the supplier has to know what the customer means by quality. And so your example there, it's described in words. Well, today, one of the ways to really prove it's not just words is DNA testing of the ingredients. And, big companies are doing that because it's the only way to get a definitive measure of what's in there, right? And so I can't take your word for it. So I think what we're going to do is the FDA is going to start, kind of like we do in medical devices, they're going to start demanding more certification and testing of ingredients that way, which is my second on my list of 16 things, is authentication techniques such as DNA testing.
Yeah, well, and this gets back to what we were talking about earlier too with USP, right? So if you're dealing with a single source type material, so we'll say sucrose or something like this. So I've dealt with customers in the past who have been in Canada, and we had a product like that, and they're like, okay, we want the monograph for your products to certify that what you're selling us matches up with what USP says it should be.
And I know from a paper we just published with USP, some organizations want to have their own sample, not the USP monograph. Well, what does that lead to? Why do you want your own sample? You don't trust USP? No, we trust USPs. We just want to do something different to it. We want to modify it. And so a lot of, the average person doesn't understand that every drug, every piece of food, everything we ingest or put in our body goes through USP in terms of that standard of what it's supposed to be. And I think you're just going to see more red tape, more standardization, more testing.
Mm-hmm. And that's an interesting lesson there on the manufacturing side is, especially when you're dealing, right? So this all comes back to trust, Joe. If you're dealing with a new supplier, they're coming from a foreign country, you don't know who the hell they are, and you're like, okay, my guard is way up. And you say something like, and I got fooled on this once. Okay, we're going to start buying from you, but I want a pre-shipment sample of what you're sending me. There's no guarantee that sample is what they're actually sending to you. They could be behind the scenes saying, okay, Bryan wants a sample, send him a sample of the good stuff, and then we'll send him something else. So you have to be careful on that side too. You have to sample what you actually get.
You know, that's another thing too. If you choose to beat the sampling system, you will choose the best samples to test.
Mm-hmm.
And this is another problem in a food chain, supply chain, is that, when you test, where you test, how much you test, time of day you test has an impact on the result of that test. So, if I want to have a third-party audit, I'm going to probably do it on the best time of the year for that product. So testing has to be, the sampling of your testing has to be for a purpose of catching failure, not demonstrating success.
Mm.
And a lot of times people will test at the opportune time. The fresh tomatoes coming in, the fresh ingredients coming in, but it's sitting in the warehouse for 16 months, and we forget we didn't test it when we used it. We tested it when it came in. So there's got to be some really hard understanding. That's why another area of the quality control or food safety management system you're using has to be challenged. It only gives you guidelines. It doesn't say you must test this every day for a year or every month for 12 months. It's up to you what's the right thing to do. So I in non-food industries, we tell everyone, challenge your sampling procedures and your testing requirements, because that's where your holes are.
Yeah.
Because sampling was either based on some historic performance, historic regulation, or current performance and current regulation. But is it enough? What's the right thing for you to prove safe quality? In other words, it tastes good, but is it safe over time? Because, products degrade over time.
Yeah.
Not only that, if they don't degrade over time, you're putting something in there that prevent them from degrading over time, which causes other issues.
Ooh, well, that's a beautiful point, right? Yeah. So example, if you're buying an oil, olive oil, sunflower oil, whatever, and they send you results of testing, to your point, Joe, that's probably when the oil was first manufactured. If it's been sitting in a warehouse getting old and rancid and nasty, you need to get a current sample. Another example, vitamin blends and things like this. Vitamins degrade. So if you're buying a vitamin blend that goes into your product and that's got some age on it, it's not going to have the same potency. You need to sample when you're getting it, not when they made it.
And the protection that the producer has is used by dates, best by dates, and that it says, well, you ate it past the due date. That's why you got sick. We've learned to either trust or not trust, depending on who put that label on there. Is it to sell more product, or is it to make us safe from, if it's to sell more product, drink that beer. I remember my grandmother had, gallons of olive oil around the house. The cans looked like they'd been there for decades.
Yeah, exactly.
And, they didn't know the difference because they trusted the supply chain.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, those are all good points. So definitely, so you in the notes, you put a source in here that I definitely want to make sure that everybody utilizes, which is fraud.org. So everybody, I put that in the chat comments here, everybody. And then also, I definitely want to talk a little bit about Juran and how can your organization help people get up to speed on this?
Well, I think it goes back to the gentleman's question. Large food producers, particularly, have most of this. It's the newer food producers, the organic producers, smaller, newer, bringing up. And by the way, I'd like to. I'm also I was on the advisory board for Farm Aid, which was Willie Nelson's flagship organization to raise money for family farmers. So over the last 20 years, I got a good dose of, how difficult it is to do some of this being a local farmer of some sort. Great organization. Matter of fact, tomorrow is the annual Farm Aid concert in Noblesville, Indiana, which Willie Nelson at 95 will still be performing, as he has been doing all year, along with a whole bunch of other things. But Juran Institute has been a quality management, so quality control, quality assurance, quality system, as well as operational excellence improved organizational culture. On that first part is where the Juran handbook on quality management spells out most of this. But, we help you identify a good supplier quality management program and a supplier verification program. And so that's the planning of picking your suppliers. Then that's followed with a quality control program that makes sure you do the right things when you get it. Usually you're already doing some food safety management system program, ISO 22000, et cetera. But how you carry that out, so we help to make sure you get the best of that. Helping you do better at audit and inspections, which we said audit, inspection, and testing. Providing training on what to look for fraud. This is something new, but providing training on what's good and what's bad, but training also to alert those people in the supply chain of this whole subject that you have here. What is fraudulent, what is ingredients. Also then create whistleblower programs. And that's, it's a scary thing, but good companies have whistleblower programs because there's always bad actors. And this is one of the ones that fraud.org will tell you to do, is create a whistleblower program to say, I saw something I didn't like and raise the issue. That's a tough one, but data analytics is probably the one de facto method tool that is going to reshape food industry because it's getting so much better to do. Cheaper, faster testing of ingredients, raw materials, fully produced materials, and the better use of the data you get. So people are going to be smarter. So for instance, we could just doing the right thing and interpret the data wrong and cause problems. And then third-party certification. I think you're going to see, people don't realize that kosher food is a third-party certification, but it has nothing to do with safety. It's just got to do with kosher, and it's a legitimate thing. But I think what you're going to see is, the celiac disease in the health industry say, I want a third-party third-party glucose certification. Or I want a third-party zero alcohol certification, very specific to make sure they're safe, because I didn't realize that people that I know that celiac disease they can detect it instantly, like within minutes, that they're going to have a problem. Yeah. And so if I'm an alcoholic reformed and I want to have a beer that's no alcohol, I want to make sure it's not going to have an effect on me. So, so I think that third-party certification, ingredient verification, traceability is another one. I mentioned blockchain, traceability of the food chain going back. And then, by the way, if you produce product and you ship it to a dealer and the dealer ships it to, sitting in a warehouse, you have no idea how long it took to get to the customer. So a food chain goes in two directions from you. You don't only have to chase where it came from, you should follow it where it goes to. How long does it take to get to the customer, right? And although the food generally moves quick, they're bad actors. It sits out there or they forget it. Risk assessment. So if you put all these in perspective, and you say, okay, let's take a risk assessment of my organization to see what kind of weaknesses I have. From those weaknesses, you would pick some of these things to say, okay, let's go after it. So we don't have a good supplier quality program, so we go after that first. Or we don't have a really good rigid testing and sampling. Let's fix that first. So you do some kind of audit. And then, food industry is good about collaboration at certain levels. But there's big and there's little. And this is an area where you can, collaborating with the right people to combat food fraud. But if you own the production of seeds for tomatoes and you control that production, I have no choice but to use your seeds. I'm not collaborating with you. You're forcing my hand. Now, if you use those seeds and they're what's the term we use today? I'll call it inorganically treated.
Okay.
I don't have a choice. I got to use your seeds. So I'm bringing in an ingredient that's knowing that it's not organic, but it's the only seed out there. So there are big suppliers of stuff like that prevent smaller suppliers from doing the right things. But it's knowing about it and making it clear to an auditor. This is all we have. And the last one is consumer education. I've been a big proponent of the Kraft food people, the Heinz people, the Unilever, Lipton's, really credible large companies. And one reason is they educate their consumer on what they do to prevent these things from happening to you.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, it's not just to keep safe environment for employees making product, but we do our best to make the product safe for you, even if you use it wrong.
Yeah. And I would say, and this goes across, it doesn't matter what the industry is here, Joe, the quality group within a company needs to collaborate really, really closely with the procurement team, because in this current environment of inflation and war and rapidly changing markets and sourcing and all these type of issues, you need to find out what procurement is working on ahead of time, right? So if that company, you can't buy sunflower oil and procurement is just scrambling to keep the plant running, trying to find some type of oil, you don't want to find out about it in quality when it shows up at your dock. You need to be involved with procurement up front. And generally, a good practice is to kind of have a two-tiered program, right? And say, okay, listen, procurement guys, as you're screening new potential suppliers, here's 3 or 4 watchouts you need to look at right away. If they can't answer these questions from a quality standpoint, they're not going to be a good supplier, right? So let's not even pursue those people, because we know it's going to be a bad actor down the road. So don't be reactive. Get as proactively involved in this process as you can.
And it's one of the few industries that if you don't have that collaboration, you can't detect the problem until it's too late. And right. I absolutely support that, because a lot of supply chain management is a separate organization, which includes the procurement of suppliers, from operations and quality. Mm-hmm. And it's basically, here you go, use it. And yet you don't see enough integration up front, but it's so important. Great.
Absolutely. Wow. So we were kind of talking offline before we went live, and it is absolutely amazing, Joe, how quickly this hour goes by. So let's kind of bring it back up to the 30,000 foot level and give everybody some kind of key deliverables. What are some of the things you would like people to take away from our chat here today?
I'm going to give you what I learned, that mm-hmm. the education on very simple few hours of preparing myself to be smart enough to talk about these things was so enlightening. So the first thing I would say is, I can't remember the time I saw someone say, let's have a session on fraudulent ingredients or counterfeit parts. So the first thing I would say is, start some community within your organization about the problems that exist out there, and make sure you're safe. Make sure you're not doing that. And if you have any doubts that your organization should be given to a whistleblower, it's a different story. But I think educating yourselves and educating your organization. For instance, if I said, who owns this? Is it the quality folk responsibility? Is it supply chain? Is it R&D? Who owns this? And so I would start right there. Educate yourselves on what could happen and what's there. And then the second piece is, always assess yourself harder than the standards ask you to, because mm-hmm. assessment is your way of not looking for what's going well, but looking for what the risks are in your system. And I would give those 2 things. And the third one is, don't panic, because good companies generally uncover these things. Bad actors generally don't.
Right. So. Very good point. So what would you like to let our listeners know about what's going on in your world? Things that are coming up.
Well, we joined with a company called Attain Partners last year. Attain Partners is the owner was a past client, great client, and he started this company 12 years ago, and 14 years ago, and they focus on higher education and non-for-profits, and we mm-hmm. don't. So we are extending what we do, hopefully through those supply chains, like improving nice. The student experience in university, implementing technology to manage that student experience. So that's one thing that's been happening. So if you go to Juran.com web page, you'll see something about Attain Partners. And if you go to Attain, you'll see something about Juran. And the second one is I participate on the International Academy for Quality Academicians, it's called. It's about the top 200 quality think tanks in the country, in the world. And the issue that we are all dealing with is, what is the future of quality and technology? So I just participated in a panel a couple of days ago in Boston on Innovation Summit. And so the same thing we just talked about safety, we're talking about what's new in quality. And that's an area that is in high demand is, how do we move from paper to technology? How do we get the best use out of our technology? And so look for that future of quality stuff. And the third one is it's time for the rewrite of the Juran Handbook, which will go into its 8th decade in print. And
Nice.
although it started, it's now they're getting me to push it forward. My objection is I didn't think anybody wants a 1,200-page book anymore. But the publisher wants a large book. And so I ask all your viewers out there, do you have any 1,200-page books that you still use? And if you do, send me a note. I want to know why. So I'm trying to figure out what goes in and what goes out because things have changed. So those are the top 3.
Nice. Very good. Yep. So fantastic. Thanks, Joe, for coming on. Amazing chat. Thank you very much. And next quarter, definitely, I want to get you back on and hear what you've learned from these groups, because AI, we didn't even talk about AI on the chat today, but just amazing things happening there that are going to impact what we do in the future moving forward, probably faster than we think.
DNA testing of food would be fun.
Oh, yeah.
You find out if you're related to a plant.
There you go. So with that, guys, we're going to bring the chat to a close. And fantastic comments, everybody. Thank you. I love it when we get the side conversations going on in the chat and people are answering everybody else's questions and chiming in on what other people are saying. Good. That's what we want, right? We're building this community and we want to support each other and take these activities that way. And so as you can see here on here is Joe's email and mine as well. So reach out to us, right? If you have questions or you want more information, happy to help. If we don't know, right? That's part of what's key in what we do, is being able to say, I don't know, but I know somebody who does know. So that's always an important thing in life to learn. So with that, we'll bring our chat to a close today. And the next week we'll be back at the same time. So Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Time, 10 a.m. Eastern, and we'll live stream on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. And I'll bring our next food safety expert on. They're going to have our time topping Joe, but I think next week we'll be able to maybe at least get on parity. So thanks again, Joe. Thank
you, Bryan. You make it easy to talk.
I love it. Thanks, everybody. Have a great weekend. Enjoy it.